money cannot buy your life back, your health back, and money cannot buy your time back. And so it
Yeah.
becomes this thing that you see that you gave so much of your life up to have, and at the end of your life, it can't do a damn thing for you. The disappointment and the realization that people who worked really hard at the end of their lives found out is like, this is nothing.
Welcome to the EO Business Podcast. I'm Linh Podetti, shining the spotlight on entrepreneurs and members of EO as they share their real, raw, and remarkable journeys. Today's guest is Travis Luther, a sociologist, serial entrepreneur, and keynote speaker with a deep passion for human transformation and the psychology of success. Travis is the founder of Luther Media and has built multiple ventures with several successful exits under his belt. He's also the former president of EO Colorado. But Travis's journey goes far beyond business. He's the creator of the How to Be a Good Time Traveler workshop and host of the Time to Live podcast, where he helps leaders reframe trauma, unlock meaning, and design a future worth living. His powerful keynote, What We Learn When We Learn We Are Dying, is based on interviews with the terminally ill and offers profound insights on regret, resilience, and legacy. In this episode, Travis takes us deep into the trauma that often drives entrepreneurs, the wisdom he's learned from the dying, and how we can all live a life with no regrets. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Let's dive right in.
This episode is sponsored by Outsourcing Angel, your partner for skilled offshore staff in LinkedIn marketing, lead generation, customer support, and more. As a social enterprise, we donate 10% of profits to charity and provide heart-centered VAs who go the extra mile for your success. Visit outsourcingangel.com.
Welcome to the show, Travis. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
And joining all the way in Colorado. I know the time is probably late at night now and mine morning. But look, you've been a very busy man. You've run multiple businesses, exited, and now you're on a mission. But before we talk about that mission of yours, which is I'm so excited about because it's something that I also discovered and I can't wait for people to learn more about it. But tell me a little bit about your journey in business and what got you here?
Yeah, I started very, very early. I grew up in a very poor family. I had a teen mom who got pregnant with me when she was 15 and was a single mom of 3 boys by the time she was 19. So we didn't have a lot of money. We were on welfare and state assistance. And so there was always kind of this nagging discomfort with being poor and not feeling like I had a lot of control over finances and the things that I wanted. And so from a very early age, my mom called them schemes, but I was always doing something to try and make, myself some money. I had paper routes. I would sell baseball cards. I would collect recyclables, so I was just always trying to do something. And when I was 17, I opened up my first licensed business with a friend of mine who was a little bit older. And we opened up a skateboard and snowboard shop in our college town. We had no idea what we were doing. We rented this little loft inside of another building. That only lasted about 6 months. Somebody broke in and stole everything. We had no idea about insurance or anything like that. But so yeah, we packed it up for about a year or two, and then me and the same guy a couple years later decided maybe we would want to open up a coffee shop when the coffee shop in our town went out of business. And so we opened up a coffee shop. Shortly thereafter, a gentleman who owned another drive-through coffee shop in town walked in and said he wanted to get out of the business and basically gave us the keys. And so we had 2 coffee shops there for a little while. Didn't know what we were doing. Still, we're not very good at business. Um, and so we closed those, or they were out of business. And then I kind of went through this period where I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had always been a musician as well, and so I tried a music career for a few years. I toured the country in a rock and roll band and making records and stuff, and that was a lot of fun. But also kind of got to the point where that was winding down too, and trying to figure out what my next steps would be. So I came out to Denver, where a friend of mine had just moved. He said, "Just come out here, check it out." Came out here, my entrepreneurial spirit was kind of revived, and I thought maybe I can do it. And so I started a little marketing company selling advertising on the blank side of valet tickets. And so at night, I was working as a valet parking cars in this really expensive restaurant district in Denver. And yeah, I was just sitting there like, I wonder if anyone would pay to put advertising on these, these tickets that I'm handing out to all of these rich people. And sure enough, they would. And so um, that was a real turning point for me because I kind of had realized at that point that all those failures that I had before, I had actually learned a lot of valuable lessons in that. And I was starting to apply them to kind of my new life and my new direction in Denver. From there, I don't know how much further you want me to go, but
I would love to hear up to your most recent ventures so that we can, start to explore about your current venture, which is really about speaking and workshops, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so while I was parking cars, I actually met my wife, who was a lawyer, and she said, "Hey, you seem to have a knack for advertising, design, and technology. Have all these lawyer friends that are looking for web design and marketing services. Would you be interested in helping them out?" And I said, "Sure." So she started feeding me these requests. Before I knew it, that business, which I called Lawfather because I was a big fan of the Godfather movies, uh, this took off and was doing even better than the valet ticket advertising business. So I pursued that for a while. But at the same time, I also decided I wanted to go back to college and try and get my degree. While I was finishing my degree, I took a course in sociology, not because I wanted to, but just because I needed to get out of school, and just fell in love with it. Just really fell in love with it and changed my major to
Can you
sociology.
tell me a little bit about the course itself? Like, what did you actually learn? Like, what did you come out becoming?
Yeah, I mean, so, psychology looks at why I often make the joke, psychology can tell you why you're screwed up, sociology can tell you why we're all screwed up, right? And so as well, psychologists will look at the single individual and try and assess how their background and their unique experiences have shaped the person that they've become. Sociologists, we like to look at groups of people and see where can we find commonalities among the shared experiences of groups that might help explain different motivations and behaviors. The reason it was so interesting to me was because, for so many years as a kid who grew up in poverty, I had this sense that the deck was stacked against me, like nothing came easy, but I couldn't understand why, because I thought I was a pretty tenacious, smart, hardworking person, but just nothing ever really seemed to unlock for me. And when I entered sociology, I could start to understand how these different social structures, right? Especially around poverty and how hard it is to move up the socioeconomic ladder, what it means to be the child of a teen mother. My father also was an alcoholic and addict who died when I was a teenager when he was only 38. So looking at my life through a wider sociological lens really started to help me understand why I seemed to constantly face these challenges that I did. And the reason it was kind of transformative in my life is because for a long time, I think I really thought that my failures were a result of something being wrong with me.
Mm.
And and so I thought, gosh, for some reason I'm screwed up and I can't seem to get anything right. And through sociology, I came to understand, there's so much that has to do with your family's income level, your grandparents' income level, your education level, the social network that you have around you, whether or not you have mentors or peers, and what those peers look like, right? Because if there are a bunch of other low-income kids who are getting in trouble, you're more likely to just continue to be a low-income kid getting in trouble, which is an interesting, point of EO that we can talk about later, but why that organization became so important to me. So it was in that understanding that I started to see him for my own life that was really attractive. And so as I plodded along in this Lawfather business, building this legal technology company, I graduated from with my bachelor's degree, but felt like I didn't want to stop. And so I started to this split life, if you will, between this career in academia that I was really interested in research and writing, and also my, entrepreneurial pursuits. And so I started my master's program. I was very successful there. That business is continuing to grow like crazy. And then I took a couple classes in a PhD program in public affairs. And I had a professor who really thought I had what it took to be a PhD student and encouraged me to apply to that program. And I did, and I got accepted, so I decided to quit the sociology master's program and start the PhD. But again, simultaneously, my business is growing, my academic career is growing, and at a point, I just had to make a decision. Which one of these are you gonna do? Are you gonna end up being a professor, or are you gonna continue to be, the businessman that you had in mind for yourself when you started this whole thing? And I made the decision at that point to pursue entrepreneurship. So I went back to the sociology department. I said, "Look, I'm going to finish my thesis, my master's, and get out of here, and then just put my work full time in business." After I did that, while I was growing Lawfather, I also started having some really bad back problems, and wanted to know, was there a pillow out there that could solve my back pain, like all the pillows that claim to solve your neck pain? And so I did some research and found out there wasn't really any. But what I did come to understand is buying pillows online was like a terribly cumbersome process that didn't make a lot of sense because it was really hard to tell the difference between a $4 pillow and a $400 pillow. And so I got this bright idea that if I could make some pillows that made me feel more comfortable after suffering these years of back pain, and find a way to educate consumers about the differences in pillows while being able to sell them online, that I might have a pretty successful company. And it turns out I was right about that. And so in 2011, I launched a company called Queen Anne Pillow, which just kind of started as a side project to my legal business, but something I was interested in, and that company really took off. And so now I was running my legal technology company and my pillow company, and then I had one final bright idea, which was we made a lot of timelines in Lawfather for trials. So we would go to court with lawyers, and we would digitize all the information in their cases. We would rent them television monitors, projectors, screens, and then run all of their exhibits in trial. And a lot of what we did was we would make graphic timelines to help show the juries, the different events that happen in a case. And I thought that could be done better if we could come up with a digital software to do that. And so I created a product called Trial Line. Um, and so both Trial Line, Queen Anne Pillow, and Lawfather were kind of running continuously right up until COVID, and so everybody has their kind of COVID story. And mine was that at the time of COVID, since so much of our business was actually going into court and sitting in trial, we could no longer operate because all of the courts closed. And it wasn't like restaurants where could do like 50% capacity or whatever. We were just closed. And so then I was stuck with the pillow company and the timeline software. And an unexpected bump in business happened as a result of that because one, everybody was now in lockdown, and so they wanted to make their bedrooms and their homes as comfortable as possible. So they started buying a ton of pillows from us. And then lawyers were moving to online presentations, trials, and mediations. And so our software became more popular at that point too, because lawyers could create digital presentations that they could present on Zoom, and let everyone know what was happening. So I think in the year or two after COVID, I had good success, but I think I got a LinkedIn message that was like, "Hey, congratulations on 18 years at Lawfather," right? And something like that. And I remember seeing that and going, "Wow, that was a long time." Like I started the company as kind of like this little side project to my other marketing company. And I think if you would have asked me, 18 years ago, did you think that this would be, half your life and half your career or whatever? I would have said no, like I never really dreamed of a life in legal technology. I mean, it served me and my family really well, but it felt like with the success that I had, with the interest that people had shown in buying my companies, that I may have come to a natural ending point, if you will, for a traditional entrepreneurial career. And so with my different partners, we made the decision to sell the businesses. And so over the last like I guess 3 or 4 years now, we sold the pillow company and we sold the legal technology company. And so that that did one thing for me. It kind of gave me a little cushion and a little space to try and figure out what I wanted to do next. And it allowed me to think about maybe this return to academia and research and speaking. I'd also had a stint teaching at the university here, and I really enjoyed that. And so I was asking myself at that point, what are the things that feel most authentic to me? What is something I feel like I can do for the next 20 years that'll give me a real personal sense of joy? And that seems really aligned with my purpose and my values. And that's when I started making the move into the work I'm doing now.
Yeah. Wow, that's an impressive journey with someone who didn't know anything about business to becoming such an inventor and serial entrepreneur. I just really love that. And I love that you're also at that crossroad where I feel like I'm at, where you're like, what's next? What's more meaningful? And so take us through why you decided to interview the people that were terminally ill, who were still kind of young, and which led you to kind of talk about trauma, etc.
Yeah. I actually started with trauma. So I don't know if your chapter has this, but we have something called EO Talks, right? And this is where members are invited to craft a TED style talk. And I had agreed to do this 5 or 6 years ago. So this was kind of like an early entry point into what I'm doing now. But, I was challenged to think of a topic that was very personal to me that I could share that would create vulnerability, and not just for me, but for other people. And I came up with a few topics. And then, I decided, what's the one thing I'm scared to death to share? And that was that I had, over the course of that back injury that I talked about, developed an opioid addiction. I had become addicted to painkillers. I was not only getting them from my doctor, but getting them from illegal places. I was supporting a habit that was pretty extensive, and I'll make a long story short, but I was able to break that after 6 years of addiction. I wanted to share that story because for 2 reasons. One, I was totally embarrassed by it. I felt like a hypocrite. I felt a lot of shame around it. I was a person that people always trusted and came to, and that everyone thought I had my shit together all the time, and then to say, "No, I actually had this secret battle with addiction that I never told anybody about," was really tough. But 2, I wanted to understand, how did that happen to me? How did I grew up in poverty, right? My father was an addict. My brothers were addicts. I had a tough life, but I was really proud of the fact that I had gotten through that and that I had become successful. But I wanted to know, why could I reach this pinnacle of success and then like suddenly slip into this addiction? And when I went to answer that question, which was a combination of self-exploration, talking to family members, and a lot of therapy, I discovered that I had for a long time been using entrepreneurship like anyone else uses a drug. I thought if I became successful and my family saw me successful, that it would heal a lot of that pain that I had from feeling neglected or unworthy or not worth people's time when I was a kid. And so even though I didn't go to drugs because I was feeling weak, or that I knew I was battling this previous trauma, when I took the drugs, I suddenly felt this peace and relief from all of that I had never felt in my life. And so I wanted to know, how did that happen? And so I did that self-work. I came to some conclusions, and then I started sharing those conclusions with EO members at different events, and the talk that I gave became really popular. And so this kinda coincided with the selling of my business, and so when I got by myself, I said, "This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write this book about my journey to understanding my trauma, my addiction, and then my redemption story," if you will. And so I was working on that for probably 6 months pretty diligently. I was really enjoying the work. But then, I got, some news that a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine and a former president of our chapter, George Morris, had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so I called George, to see how he was doing, and George and I had both, George and I had both lost our fathers as teenagers, and so that was kinda something we bonded over. When a young man loses his father, it's kind of this hole that never gets, filled, and he and I had talked about that before. And I told him on the phone that I had always thought about maybe doing a research project, interviewing people with terminal illness to kind of gather their last bits of wisdom and advice. But I said my motivation to do that is because when my father was in hospice, when he was dying, I didn't engage with him. I never asked him questions about what it was like to face his own mortality, what advice he might have for me, because I was angry. You know, his disease was a result of his addiction, and I felt like he had chosen drugs and alcohol over his family, and I didn't really want anything to do with him, or I wasn't very sympathetic to him in the end. But but I told George this story, and I said I've been thinking about interviewing people as a way to collect wisdom from people who are facing the end of their lives, but maybe also as a opportunity to get a little closure for myself. And so what would you think about that if I like maybe did a podcast or something interviewing people? And he said, "I think it's a great idea, and I'd like to be your first guest." And so it was kind of with George's, blessing that I decided to, I interviewed him and we had a great talk, and I could see like that this kind of information and reflection by people facing the end of their lives could be very powerful, not just for me, but for other people.
Yeah.
And
It
then I
must be very healing for him as well, huh? For someone like George to be able to kind of have his last word or share all the things, I would guess it's very healing for him too.
Yeah, I think that, one thing I learned, and not just that I had a sense of, but that people told me, is being able to talk to me,
Mm.
having me do these interviews that are being recorded, is a lot easier than talking to their families sometimes because they feel like a burden to their families, and they don't wanna make their families sad, and so these, if they start talking about facing their own mortality in ways, I heard this over and over again, these folks felt like they were letting their families down by conceding the fact that they were gonna die from this disease, and by not just talking about fighting it all the time. So yeah, and George had similar feelings too. He was very hesitant to talk about his disease in terms of it being terminal, even though I think both he and I knew exactly that that's what it was, and it was, unfortunately, about 9 months after our interview, George did pass away from his cancer. But, but anyway, with like I said, with his blessing, I started posting some things saying, "Hey, I hope not, but if you know anyone dying, me for this project, send them my way." And it happened pretty fast, that people reached out to me. I joined some end of life communities on Facebook and had gotten a little, word of mouth, referrals, and pretty soon I was doing, many interviews, some recorded, some not. Not everybody was a great candidate for the podcast per se. Um, but yeah, I started collecting dozens of reflections from these folks, and then it was kinda like, "Okay, now what?" So now what do we do? What do we do with all this information, all these transcripts? And so, I said, "Okay, I'm gonna start to consolidate these into some main themes and some main ideas. Like, where am I seeing things that are consistent that people are saying over and over again?" And I started asking my friends too and my family members, like, what would you wanna know from people who are at the end of their lives about what they think, And so I got a lot of topics, regret, legacy, family, love, relationships, all sorts of really interesting questions. And so I put together a questionnaire. I think it was like 22 or 25 questions, and just sat with the dying and just kinda went through them. And I mean, it was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And what were some of those wisdom that you could share to entrepreneurs? Because I too have come to that realization that a lot of entrepreneurs, um, including really close people to me, who really get stressed out about finance, about growing bigger and bigger, and forgetting that life is so fleeting, it's so fragile, you never know. And even though I haven't come up, I didn't face any health issues or anything, but for the first time, I'm actually a little bit more wiser. Because when I was younger, I was always the one having to try everything myself to know something. Here, I'm like, I don't need to try. I just need to observe and know that there are people dying really young, and I don't want to live with regrets. And so I'm balancing between worrying about the future and living my day right now. And there's so many people I want to wake up to this. Hey, you don't. Yeah, it's not all about financial success and business. So I guess what were some of those wisdom that an entrepreneur could take away?
Well, I think one of the big ones that I think is especially applicable to entrepreneurs, certainly myself, is how much we defer to the future, right? Like
Mm,
we put so many things off because we say, when I have so XYZ amount of money or XYZ amount of time, or when I finally retire, right? And so we're not always kind to the people around us, to our family or our friends with our time. And we wear work and stress as a badge of honor. And I think that when I talk to people at the end of their lives with regard to, this constant work and collection of money, the question they ask back is, what for, right? At the end of your life, like, what what did it matter what you had accumulated, and how has what you accumulated become more important than what you gave up in terms of time with your friends, your family, those vacations you should have taken, those stress-free weekends you should have had in the mountains, right? Because, the not so funny thing is that when these folks get to the end of their lives, they may have been wildly successful. They could have millions and millions of dollars in the bank. And you know what? It doesn't do anything for them. You can't buy your health, right? Like whatever your prognosis is, generally when you get to stage 4, or the writing is on the wall, right? And so you can't take millions of dollars and spend it on treatments, experimental treatment and stuff. I mean, your prognosis and your treatment is pretty much the same for everybody, whether you have $1 zillion or $2. And so money cannot buy your life back, your health back, and money cannot buy your time back. And so it becomes this thing that you see that you gave so much of your life up to have, and at the end of your life, it can't do a damn thing for you. And I think the the disappointment and the realization that people who worked really hard at the end of their lives found out is like, this is nothing. This thing that I have in the bank.
yeah. And just curious, when you interview them, did they come across as they never thought it would happen to them? Because
Yeah.
I'm just
Well,
yeah.
yes. I mean, so there are other studies uh, of people. There's another big study, actually, it's out of Australia by a woman named Bronnie Ware. She wrote a book called The Top
Yeah,
5
that's right. I've read that
Yeah.
too.
It's a great book, it really is. But the difference between Bronnie's work and mine is that Bronnie was kind of working with people who were at the natural end of their lives, right? Like, these are older people,
Yeah.
and so these weren't these weren't a lot of tragic cases, right? And in my study, it's almost, well, it is entirely people. I don't think anyone's over 50, and so they are younger people who this is an unexpected diagnosis and not something that, they ever thought would happen to them, right?
Yeah.
And so their attitudes, their regrets, their challenges are much different than somebody who may be in their 80s, right? Um, but, I'm sorry, what was your question again?
Oh, yeah, no, I just stopped there with just more around the question of, yeah, that they didn't expect it to happen because they're still young and they're still kind of in the middle of their life, right? And that's one of entrepreneurs that I want to talk to. It's the one that is still, hey, I'm on a mission, and I think this also relates to the trauma thing. It's like sometimes they're like, but I love working, I love business, and I'm doing it, and
Yeah.
they realize the difference between trauma, you know, controlling them, and it's really them choosing that path.
Yeah, right, like, that's the thing, I think people quite often when they say that "Well, I love it, and I love working so much," and whatnot, I don't wanna say that they're liars, but I don't think that they've really examined what their motivations are, right? Because I think on the trauma side of my work, I have definitely found that entrepreneurs are using that crazy level or intense level of work as a way to avoid the other maybe emotional states in their life that they don't wanna deal with, right? Whether they're from their way back past, or it's trouble that they've created now at home because of their work, right? They don't wanna go back and deal with that. But to go back to your question about, the younger entrepreneurs and whether or not they expected it, while they didn't expect it, the most interesting and unexpected finding of my research was the degree to which they blamed themselves for their cancer. And this This was really unexpected to me because it wasn't anything that I was asking about. It was just something that I started to hear over and over again. And so then I started asking about it. And so when I say that they blame themselves for the cancer, the big theme in my workshop and my forthcoming book is what I found is that people have two lives. They have their lived and their unlived life. And when they get a terminal diagnosis, they suddenly see the distance between the life they're living now and the life that they thought they were always going to live when they were younger, right? Like the plan that they had for themselves. And so when I asked them, well, what does this mean that you think that you're somehow responsible for your cancer? And they would basically say kind of the same thing. They say, "Look, there was somebody that I wanted to be. There was a life that I would have chosen for myself, and for some reason, I got off the path that I wanted, and I got on either the path that I thought had been prescribed for me or would be easier for me or would be healthier for my family. And over time, I had to spend a lot of energy pushing my authentic self and my own wants, needs, and desires deep, deep down inside of me, and over time, the stress and anguish that that caused eventually, according to them, led to some of the inflammation or the high levels of cortisol or whatever that eventually created this cancerous environment and then led to their sickness. And so when I give my talk or my workshop, what I talk about is, okay, well, let's look at this idea of lived and unlived lives and how much distance is between yours. And I've come to believe that most people's anxiousness or anxiety or dissatisfaction is really parallel to or matches the gap between who they are right now and who they thought they were going to be. And so really work to say, can you have a similar situation like I did in my life where you can say, huh, I'm not feeling like I'm really living my authentic self right now. What am I doing that still feels right to me, but where am I putting time and energy into things that really don't interest or serve me, but that I feel obligated to do?
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. And because it ultimately is really about just making sure that whatever it is you got, on this earth, that you are living your authentic self, doing what you love. Even if you're working hard doing that, but at least it feels good. Like it doesn't feel like work, right? I was just curious also, the people that you did interview, did any of them actually really took care of their health, but they still passed away? Or were in general, they were kind of really focused on career or business?
Um, I would not say that the majority of the people that I interviewed were unhealthy people. Uh, but they did all warn that they could have done a better job of taking care of their health. And so in terms of regrets, when we look at the list of some of the regrets that my study participants expressed, one of them was, I wish I would have taken care of my health sooner. And by sooner,
Did you have different regrets to Bronnie Ware's a regret with she interviewed the older people and you interviewed the younger one. Were there a similarity or different?
there were some similarities and there were some differences. But the big one was in with regard to relationships. And so people in my study talked about being in relationships too long, whether those were business partnerships, romantic partnerships, or friendships that seemed to be one-sided or not serving them, but how this deep fear of hurting somebody's feelings kept them stuck in these relationships and that they traded their actual time of their lives for the service of these other people who either didn't care or didn't appreciate what they were giving up to serve them. And that's a tough, when I'm 47, I don't know how old you are, but if I were to have a diagnosis and I were to reflect back on that, I might have similar feelings. I think that the thing that really drives it home is when these people are talking about after their diagnosis, they really have to decide what they're going to trade their time for because they know their time is limited. So an interview with me, right? Like they have to decide like, do I have a couple hours to do this with this guy? And is this as valuable as time I could spend with my family? You take that in reverse and you have a 42-year-old or whatever that's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and now he or she looks back on their life and sees how much of it they traded in the service for other people who didn't appreciate it. And you can see that anguish is really tough, and so if there's a lesson that comes out of that, it's you shouldn't trade parts of your life or a time of your life to somebody who's not giving you something of equal value in return, right? And a lot of that is good energy and good love that we need to live into the future. Reduce our stress hormones and, give us that feeling of love that really sustains a lot of people into their late 80s and 90s.
Yeah. And everything that you've learnt now and you compare it to the years that you were in business, were there any regrets of wishing that you could have done things differently? Or, I guess, what's your perspective on looking back now?
Me personally or the people I
You
interviewed?
personally, you and your own journey with the new information now.
Yeah, I think that, my regrets, I think we all like to say, "Oh, I have no regrets. I've just learned stuff." But, I can tell you one of the quote unquote regrets that my study participants expressed, especially those who were in business um, for themselves that I share is one of focus. So I heard over and over again, "I wish I would have been more focused. I wish I hadn't." It's like it's not to say they wish they hadn't risked so much because risk is part of the business. But as entrepreneurs, it's I wish I hadn't been so distracted, right? I wish I hadn't had you just heard my story, right? I had my legal technology in a company, then my software company, right? And so I'm no exception to the rule. And I talked to people who had many of these, but they said, and I would agree, like, I wish I had more focus because if I could have had more focus, I probably would have had more success in that one venture, and I probably would have been able to do a little bit more with my family that I wanted to do. So I would say, yeah, focus was probably the
Yeah.
one I shared
Yeah.
with them. Yeah.
I totally agree. I think early on in our entrepreneur journey, we all think, we have our hands on different pies that could all potentially succeed. But yeah, it just means that less time with the main business. So talk about now, like what is your current work? I know you mentioned a little bit about workshops. I guess what's your mission and future in your own career now?
Yeah, with regard to the terminal illness work that I'm doing, my mission is to really give people a sense that they have a right to their life, right? To really be free, to be free of the constraints of these societal ideas about, what you should do and what the measures of success are, right? The measures of success to the people who are dying are not money, right? And they're not things. When a lot of people who get to the end of their lives, they look at all the stuff they have accumulated and they realize what a frickin' burden it is. Not just for them to get rid of, but for their kids. It's stuff that that nobody else wants that they just accumulated over years that does nothing but sit there. And now trucks are gonna have to come and take it out, right? And then the other thing is the money. Like, it's not making money is not bad, right? Like I always say this quote, "I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. Trust me, it is," right? So it's not that money's bad, but it's this idea that money is the only thing, right? And that the measure of who I am as a person and my worth as a person is directly related to my bank account. And so that's the other thing I want to caution people of is like when you get to the end of your life, the money means nothing to you and it certainly can't save you and it can't buy your time back. So use your money. Don't put off those trips. Don't put off those sabbaticals with your family. Uh, don't pretend you're gonna live forever, like, don't pretend that your time is finite. So that's the point of my workshops, and also thinking about legacy in terms of, what are you doing now, right? Like living legacy, if you will. Like, when you're dead, it's out of your control, and so we do some exercises, what's your grandfather's name? What's your great-grandfather's name? What's your great-great-grandfather and then, and eventually you're like, "Well, crap, no one's gonna know who I am in a few years," and so, like, do you need a park bench named after you? Do you need a building named after you? Or is there things that you can do in the world right now that will create a legacy of goodwill for you, maybe not necessarily in your name, but where you can see positivity coming out of your later years and enjoy it while you're alive, right?
Yeah.
Like that book, Die with Zero or whatever it is, right?
I love that book as well. It's really a challenge to try to spend all your money before you die. I think our kids want to hear about it.
Right. Yeah, well, it hasn't been a challenge for me. I've been able to spend it pretty well, but yeah. Well, yeah, so that's the work in death and dying, right? So I go through the results of what I found. I talk more specifically about the regrets I've discovered. I talk about the idea of the lived and unlived life, and I give some tips about how do we start to unify those two things, and how do we create a statement about what really matters to us. So as we enter the second half of our lives, we're doing with that with more purpose. It's more aligned with our values, and we're doing it where we feel like our real freedom and right to our own lives, and that we're not being pushed in directions by either individuals or society.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing that I'm doing is my workshop on the intersection of trauma and entrepreneurship, and so in my like I said, previous to George's diagnosis, which kinda, gave me a hard right turn, and I knew it was gonna be temporary, but I'm returning to my research on trauma on entrepreneurship. But, what I've found is that 75% of high-performing entrepreneurs have had some kind of trauma, chronic trauma in their childhood. And what I've learned is that a lot of times that trauma has driven us into entrepreneurship for a couple of reasons. One, we really need to have control because we've had terribly hard childhoods where we felt like we had no control. And two, that becomes an option for a lot of us who, trauma and poverty are related, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. And so entrepreneurship does become the way that we get our self-worth and our recognition from people as well as make a living. And so I have a workshop called How to Be a Good Time Traveler, and we go through 5 steps to go back and look at your past and then create a future all your own by using some of my tools and methodology to break free from some of the ideas and habits we form from early trauma that serve us well as early entrepreneurs, but really get in the way of our success as we get older. For example, being terribly self-reliant and a self-starter and a go-getter is great when you're building a company from 0 to 100,000, 200,000, maybe even $1,000,000, right?
Mm.
But as you build enterprise and you say, "Well, if I can't do it, nobody can," right? That's generally a trauma response actually, right? Is this you need to be in control. Well, that's gonna get in the way of your bigger dreams, and so there are a lot of behaviors that serve us young entrepreneurs well, but are really detrimental to our success as we get older in our life, and so I'm trying to help entrepreneurs see what those are and break free from them so that they can create the future that they always had in mind for themselves.
Oh, they sound like awesome workshops. I can't wait for it to release this video and episode because I think, just like you, I'm really passionate about this topic because I think it's just somehow how can we wake people up before it's too late, before they regret it. Well, this leads me to, I guess, the last segment. We want to talk a little bit about EO. I mean, I love this conversation so much that time just went by. Um, yeah, how did you join EO about 12 years ago or something, and you have a president. Tell me a little bit about how you got in there and what it's done for you.
Yeah, I actually had a potential client that I was working a sales call on, a lawyer, and he kinda stops me in my sales stuff, and he starts asking me questions about my business and your plans and what are you doing and who's your mentor and all that. I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he gave me a ticket to an event, and he said, "Well, you might be interested in this group called EO." And I said, "Okay." So I went to this event, and I loved it. And I remember the president of that event getting up, at the end of it. It was a series of keynotes. It was like a one-day, uh, retreat, if you will, but it was a series of keynotes open to the public. And he talked about what an honor it was to serve as president, what it meant to be among his peers. Just he talked about things that we all went through, like, what it meant to have people to talk to about these things without shame or anxiety. And I said to myself in that moment, man, I want to be president of this organization someday. And so the event ended. I called them. I said, "How do I become a member?" They said, "Oh, no, no problem. Do you have $1,000,000 in revenue?" I was like, "No." Was a total like, just totally deflated, right? Like, I was like, I was like, "I'll do anything." They said, "Well, we have this accelerator program for people who are at 250,000 to $1,000,000 in revenue," and I still only was at, like, 240. I called the lady, I said, "Please let me in, please let me in," and she said, "Okay." So yeah, I went through the accelerator program for 3 years, um, built my business to $1,000,000, joined that was about the same time that I had started the pillow company as well, built that company to $1,000,000 much quicker, and just, yeah, really loved it, got into leadership as soon as I could, served in various board roles, and then when the opportunity came to run for president, I raised my hand and, yeah, we have an election. I did that. And then,
You became a president.
I just finished, in last July, so about a year ago. Yeah.
Oh,
I ran the national GSEA program for the United States in 2019. I've been learning chair. Now I'm the Marcoms expert for the US West region, so now I'm in the regional leadership. But yeah, I've had 3 or 4 board roles, plus the presidency, plus national stuff, plus working on global stuff, and, I just, yeah, I'm a lifer.
yeah. If usually people go, "Oh, I'm too busy for EO." Why is it that you've made so much time to contribute to run so many roles and across so many years?
Because it's the single most important thing I did to change the trajectory of my business, which changed the trajectory of my life, right? Like, everything great that happened to me happened well, I won't say everything great, I mean, but a a lot of great things that happened to me after, you know, after I joined EO, right? I mean, I got married before EO and I had my kids before EO, and those were definitely, like, some of the greatest things to happen to me. But the things that focusing on my business and having a peer group and improving as both a person and a business leader, the things that allowed me to do with my family and my life wouldn't have happened if not for EO. And I'm at a place now, like I said, I'm 47. I've been in EO 12 years. I'm in regional leadership now. And what's most important to me as we talk about what are those measures of success, mine are not money anymore, right? Mine are, can I be that person that I needed when I was struggling? And so being in leadership and continuing to be in EO gives me a chance to find those younger folks who were exactly where I was and to one, like reassure them like, hey, everything's gonna be great, man. You're not gonna believe how great your life is gonna be. And then 2, show them exactly how to do that. I will.
Oh, what an amazing glowing testimonial, especially when you went from, accelerator through to graduating to EO and still here. So, oh, we're so grateful to have you still. Well, this leads me to my last question. I know we can probably, I can't wait to meet you in person, by the way. I could tell we could have a really, really long chat. Ultimately, with everything that you're doing, what do you want EOers, friends, everyone else to kind of remember Travis for?
I think for my service, like just that I actually cared, right? Like we see a lot of people in business who want to shake hands and put a business card in every one of your pockets and everything is about the next deal and stuff like that. And that I just want people to know and believe that I cared about people first and their success because I want, like I said, because I just want to be that person that I needed so badly when I was younger. And that to me, the business stuff comes second, right? It's important to me, but it's not, I don't want to be remembered as a great businessman. I want to be remembered as somebody who served people so that they could get the things that they wanted because I got them too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Travis. It was such a mind-blowing conversation, a very rare opportunity for us to hear all the insights from your interview with the terminally ill, and your message to the world is so important. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate
Thank
you.
you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.